Hi, and welcome back to the European VC, the go-to podcast for everything European VC. If you love the show, share it with your friends and join our newsletter at eu.vc. Today's episode is a special one, as we're here to welcome John, head of UpLink at the World Economic Forum, as our co-host. John will tell you all about the innovative funds of our future. And as our guest, we welcome Sandy, Managing Director of Investments at ImpactAssets. If you enjoy our content, do support us by hitting the follow button, giving us a review, and following the European VC on LinkedIn.
So today we have a slightly different episode for you because we are here to welcome John Dutton as the host. And John is a good friend of the European VC and also the head of UpLink at the World Economic Forum. So John, with that slight, disclaimer for this being a different episode than what we usually do at the European VC, I'll let you take the stage.
Thanks so much, Andreas. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is John Dutton, the head of UpLink at the World Economic Forum. Thrilled to be here because actually we get to do a little bit of the heavy lifting, convene people, host this episode in a way that we do at our typical meetings in Davos. So we're excited to be here. We've got Andreas, who is going to take a different role. He was part of the sausage-making operation that spit out 17 amazing funds. He helped design it. He helped think about what we should be looking for. And he's going to give a little bit of his experience about why he and David are involved. And we also have Sandra Kartt from ImpactAssets along with us. So it should be a really fun episode today where we get to explore how venture capital firms of the future are thinking today about the types of enterprises that we really need to see for a better future and better planet. So with that, let me kick off. I'm going to start with you, Andreas, and I'd love to hear a little bit about why did you guys get involved? And that you need no introduction, so don't introduce yourself, but just hop in. Like, how did you get involved? Do you remember?
I was hoping that I could spend 5 minutes here talking about myself instead of anything else. But yes, so as everything, network gets you to get involved in something. And in this case, it's David, who's been working for a long time with the forum. And as such, it was very natural for us to get involved in this project, given everything we do at the European VC. What we really loved about the challenge was that, of course, it helped us put some more light on the great emerging managers that we have working in this space. And quite personally, I can say that, at the end of the day, when I touch down on the pillow and I have had a day's work where it's been more focused on impact and on bringing forward people who are, a bit different from the old guard and who have always been wielding the wand of power in this world, then I'm quite satisfied. And then I feel I've done a good day's work, and this project allowed us to do that. So we were just super happy that we got the invitation, and I think it was a great experience, but we'll dive a bit more into that later probably.
Fantastic, Andreas. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about why we're here, why you're here. And it's also my pleasure to introduce Sandra Kartt from ImpactAssets. Now, listen, we're going to have a little fun with this, but we also have to be serious. Let's just get it out of the way. Let's get the compliance bits out of the way. Introduce yourself. Let's talk about all the things you're not allowed to say. And then we can get into all the things you are allowed to say. Does that sound good?
Perfect. Thank you, John. And thanks for having me. So my compliance officer insists I say nothing more before disclosing that anything I say today reflects my personal views and not those of ImpactAssets Capital Partners, and nothing in this discussion should be considered investment advice for any person. So with that out of the way, hi.
I'm sure my boss would have wanted me to say that same thing, that the World Economic Forum is not telling you to invest in any of these funds, but we do think they're doing some good stuff.
I agree with that.
And whatever Sandy just said, we also think at the European VC for sure.
Well, listen, let's, now that we've gotten that out of the way, Sandy, why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself, and then we can talk about the IA50 and a lot of the other things ImpactAssets.
Sure, sounds good. So I'm the Managing Director of Investments at ImpactAssets Capital Partners. I've been with ImpactAssets in some capacity for the past 8 years or so, and working in the impact investing space for over 12 at this point, after starting my career more of a traditional Wall Street role and then kind of seeing the light of the impact investing world and making the transition right about 12 years ago now. So at ImpactAssets, I oversee the sourcing and diligencing of the investment funds and the other investments and portfolios that we make available for our clients. And also we work with some specific clients to help them build custom impact investing portfolios. And so my team is out there sourcing and diligencing and working on the portfolio construction for all of that. And then on the IA50, so Impact Assets 50 is something that Impact Assets has been doing for about 12 years now. If the listeners are not familiar with it, it's an annual showcase of impact investment fund managers that we make available to the public. It's a free searchable database. It was really created as a way to showcase the breadth of the impact investing industry. Impact Assets roots, we're a nonprofit financial services industry. And so field building and developing the industry of impact investing has been a big part of our business. So the Impact Assets 50 was created to kind of do that.
Many of our listeners will maybe have heard about Impact Assets, but they don't know you well enough to say, okay, this is how big the fund of fund program, or how much activity you actually do in the fund space. Could you just shed a bit more light on that for people to understand? And also, all our listeners are GPs in Europe, and many of them are also working inside the climate space or somewhat towards it. So I'd love to also, they will be thinking, should I be reaching out to Impact Assets? Could you share a bit more insights there?
Sure. So Impact Assets has a little over $2 billion in total assets under management. The bulk of that is within the donor advised fund, which is a structure that's pretty unique to the U.S. because there's specific tax advantages for U.S. investors. So most of our clients are U.S. investors. They're mostly high net worth individuals, some foundations or corporates, but we definitely invest globally. In fact, we'll get into it in more detail later, I'm sure, but there's some overlap between both the IA50 and the fund selected for the Innovative Funds Challenge. And there's also some overlap with what we have invested in through Impact Assets. So yeah, I think, we're always looking for good funds that are working in the impact space in particular. We've been specifically orienting around the themes of climate, racial equity, and gender lens investing more recently, but our clients invest across impact themes, across asset classes, and across risk return profiles as well.
So this is one of the areas in which I've found that there's a lot of symbiosis between what you guys are up to, Andreas, and their whole effort on the emerging managers, how you guys have done it, had a specific focus on supporting GPs in Europe to kind of get off the ground. Do you want to talk a little bit more? Why is this an interesting aspect of the challenge for us? And how does it link to some of the, let's say, values you guys have of supporting the industry?
The forum is actually very, very involved in the VC scene and startup scene, and you're doing many great things. And that's, of course, the work that David has been involved with. And as such, this is just I was almost about to say an offspring of all your activities. And of course, this is where we are very close to each other, because this whole program or initiative was started because you at UpLink wanted to somehow figure out how can we add the most to the VC ecosystem and the tech startup ecosystem. What we really got into very quickly was, well, the best thing you can almost do is give emerging managers, I'm about to call it credibility, right? In terms of, validation from someone who have looked at them seriously and really gone through their materials and diligence them enough to say, okay, we trust in this team, we trust in their ability to execute all those things. And then we said, well, you can actually do that without necessarily investing, right? If you have enough of a reputation to put on the line, then, just putting out that message about a fund, which is in effect what's happening when our selection committee has said that these 17 funds are, worthwhile looking into. Then we thought, well, this is a very interesting initiative to get involved in. And of course, it's very close to what we do, because what we do is pick up European emerging managers and at the same time also invest in select few of them.
That's great. Well, listen, so here's how we're going to run the rest of this podcast. We're going to be doing a part that hopefully is a little bit informative, a part that is a little bit less exciting, but we think is really important to do, which is kind of giving you, let's say, a walkthrough of the various funds that we've selected. And then we're going to engage in a bunch of Q&A. And it's going to be between myself, Andreas, Sandy, and it should be more of a dialogue and a discussion. So let me get a little bit about, because your audience knows who you are. They now know a little bit more about Sandy. Let me give you a quick overview about UpLink and why we decided to go into this direction. You kind of launched into a little bit there, Andreas, but UpLink was launched as the open innovation platform for the World Economic Forum. We've been on one other episode, so I can't say that we're famous and that your audience knows us really well, but at least there was one other chance. Our mission is really to try to connect the bridges across the innovation ecosystem. We're looking to do that by selecting, 10 to 15 big topic areas across the SDGs, everything from freshwater ecosystems, the ocean, climate change, circular economy, health, education, and really try to figure out who are the biggest and brightest entrepreneurs that are going to change our world for the better, and what are the resources that they need to scale. And as we've done that, we've realized that, it really does take a village to try to see impact happen on the ground. It takes government actors that are trying to change policy, it takes the private sector to try to change the dial and how they are working with smaller players and thinking about actually investing themselves in some of those upstarts. And certainly it takes the funding and investment ecosystem as well. For us, we've been around, we're a bit of a startup ourselves. We've been around, this is our third year of operations. The platform now has over 50,000 users on it. There's nearly 4,500 entrepreneurs who have submitted their companies onto the site. We have also received about 100 submissions of venture funds as well for this first challenge on the VC side. And we've got a vibrant ecosystem of people who are telling their stories, who are sharing impact updates, who are sharing funding updates. And it's been our job then to take the biggest and brightest of those ones, the ones that are really having that impact and are ready for scale, and to figure out how the World Economic Forum's ecosystem can play a little bit of a role of tipping the scales in their direction. Many of them don't come from the Silicon Valley, Oxbridge suite of place where they can get everything at their fingertips. And so our hope is that we can help some of these entrepreneurs and funds make their way and increase the scale of their work. So that's a little bit about UpLink. This challenge itself was set up with the idea of, how could we shed a light on and provide the credibility, visibility, and access for the types of funds that are needed to scale those entrepreneurs? And if we're really honest about it, it's also about helping the funds gain access to LPs, to the capital that they will need to scale, and to try to say to the world that there's a different way of doing things.
That, of course, is a mandate that makes a ton of sense, right? Because, and Sandy, do comment on this, because you're in the same situation, right? You come from Impact Assets, and as you just said, the bulk of your capital is not going to VC. That's the issue a bit for VC, right? We are naturally a very small part of the overall asset pool with whoever is going to invest in us. And as such, how the hell can you really spend that much time on a 1 million or 500K or 2 million euro ticket into a fund when, the moment after you're looking at, okay, this 20 million euro solar investment we're going to do, how can you warrant that you need to spend as much time to make a good decision on which VC fund manager to back? It's so difficult, right? It's the same thing we see in VC funds. That's why you have VC funds that some do early stage and some do Series A and B and D, because it's kind of weird to be talking about a due diligence process where the cost for the legal team is the same as the total ticket that you're putting in at a series pre-seed stage, right? So in that sense, it can be quite difficult to allot your time across the spectrum of assets, and thus having someone like UpLink and the WEF going behind the scenes and picking the funds, or some funds that are worthwhile looking at least, that it's really something that's super important. And a lot of people listen to the WEF and UpLink for guidance as to how to think about the world. So I think it's super important. Do you recognize that issue, Sandy?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, you nailed it with the diligence hurdle being, it's so expensive for what you're looking at in the ticket size. And so I think that was one of the things that was so compelling about the work that John was doing with this challenge, was the exposure that these funds get, I think is going to make a huge difference. And none of us on the selection committee were doing full diligence, to be clear. My compliance officer would appreciate me saying. We were digging into the impact model and choosing the ones that we wanted to highlight. So it's kind of like a little bit of a head start, I think, for somebody who would be interested in taking a closer look.
Yeah, and to be honest, it's great that everyone loves VC, right? But it also means that we have so many more trying to launch VC firms, almost like a startup now, you launch a VC firm instead. And that development means that just the fact that you go to the level of the diligence that we've done for picking the funds for this challenge, because obviously it hasn't been the same process as if we were to invest, but it's still, it's that grunt work that for many, is just, how do I get through the first 15 or 20 that just applied?
From our side, what are we trying to do, right? We're trying to, alongside all of the brilliant entrepreneurs that we've sourced in the areas that I mentioned earlier across the SDGs, we also want to shed a light on the various funds that are working in that space as well. We're going to continue to do it. This was a first effort. I think moving forward, we may even think about not doing kind of dedicated fund challenges, but actually making sure that along each challenge that we run to source entrepreneurs, we also have a parallel track that is sourcing the types of funds that are working in that space. Which means that in this first one, we were focused on VCs. It was very much trying to hit that sweet spot of the venture capital space. When you look at something like regenerative agriculture in Africa, and the seed level entrepreneurs that are coming on board there, sometimes what they need is actually philanthropic money. And so in the future, we're going to try to vary the types of funding and funds that we bring on board to match the types of entrepreneurs that we're also calling for as we go forward. But I think in this first effort, what was fun about it is that we gave it kind of that big global landscape, the cross-thematic landscape, and it gave us a chance to see kind of a little bit of a testing ground about what's out there and who is interested in trying to get a bit more visibility, a little bit of that recognition and credibility you mentioned, Andreas, and some of the access. So listen, put your feet up, get a cup of coffee or a glass of water. I'm going to go through all 17. One sentence about each one. It doesn't do enough justice, but I think it does give us a little bit of a sense of who's here. alphabetical order. Going to try to give it a little bit of sweet spot, and also gets the taste buds going for Andreas and Sandy when they come back and maybe can say a word or two about some of the ones they've come across or kind of remember from some of the due diligence and selection work that we did.
In almost every episode, we ask our guests, how did you come up with your name? And then quite often, or almost every time that someone names something with A or a number first, it is from the reasoning that, well, we kind of thought that we would be the first one to be listed in in a list
some sort
like
of
this
list,
one.
right?
It works.
That's great. And the first one is a number, 2150, which I think is really interesting because you have a firm that is investing in technologies that are making urban areas more sustainable, from building materials, heating and cooling, as well as focusing on energy and food solutions. And if you know Christian and the team over there, you'd understand why 2150, they're really trying to think well into the future of a world that is going to be much different. EUVC is supporting a diverse group of founders reversing the effects of climate change with breakthrough innovations in the circular economy, health, and climate action. The team behind this was involved in the B team and has had a really nice track record out in Asia. 2150, I should mention, investing globally based in the UK. Barca Fund, to keep the ball rolling, is focusing on African entrepreneurs and particularly ecopreneurs who are addressing climate challenges in their communities by offering founders an investment readiness program followed by capital investment. So this one's quite cool because they run an accelerator program where they give some money into each of them and they get to know them, they work with them, and then a handful of them they're going to invest in. So different approach. It's about trying to also build out the capabilities even if they don't invest right away.
Should we jump in on them piecemeal? Because I think, I've got a comment there, which is we just invested into Startup Wise Guys, which is not a fund that does climate as such. It's part of their mandate, but it's not focused only there. But it's also an accelerator model. And I just love the accelerator model because, sometimes what you want is to find those diamonds in the rough, and you can strike some pretty good deals when you do an accelerator model. And I can't remember Barca Fund. I don't know Barca Fund well enough to know how many bets they do, but I love it also because it typically allows also the funds to do a shitload of bets, which is something that, of course, is integral in VC.
Sandy, have you seen, do you guys support some of the accelerator funds as well?
We have made investments in accelerator funds or partnered. Years ago, we partnered with a few accelerators to bring some of our clients alongside and do co-investments with some accelerators.
So Barca Fund for us was interesting because it's also really connected to the World Economic Forum's Trillion Tree Initiative. 1T.org is a project that's hosted by the forum that's focused on reforestation, restoration, and conservation of the world's trees. And in the Sahel region of Africa, we're partnering with the African Union and other entities to build the Great Green Wall. So the Barca Fund is all about supporting entrepreneurs, ecopreneurs who are going to try to build back the Sahel forestry area. I'm going to keep going in the B's, almost finished there. The Black Tech Capital is another one that we identified, and they are funding Black and other underrepresented entrepreneurs. They're focused on clean tech, investing mostly in North America, but also overseas, and as well as partnering with accelerators and universities. They're doing that really in partnership so that they can give a leg up to some of the founders who are coming from some of those underrepresented communities. We got to meet them in New York. Amazing to see how they've partnered with a whole ecosystem in Canada and the US across universities to get the ball rolling for those communities.
If I should add one thing to that model is, I had this thought the other day, I would just wish universities would partner with VC funds rather than try and build their own, because it's typically not the best game for a university. I get that there are some that are very successful. MIT is doing some very interesting things with the engine, but the majority of universities would probably be better off acting as a strategic LP than trying to build a lot of stuff themselves.
Very true. And I think if we can, I think that's part of this. One of my thesis as we got into this was, in some cases, LPs don't need to start their own thing. You sometimes have billionaires and who are thinking, I'll just create my own fund. Well, there's some amazing funds out there. Yeah. Just like, as you say, the universities have these endowments that they're looking to roll out. And so a lot of these VCs could be good options for you.
Yeah. I just wanted to chime in on Black Tech. I thought this one was particularly interesting when we were going through the review process because of the fact that it really sits at the intersection of social and environmental by funding underrepresented founders. And this is something that we're really talking a lot about at Impact Assets right now, and the climate justice, knowing that racial and ethnic minorities are really the most vulnerable to the devastating effects of climate change. I'm going to be more compelled by any fund that is bringing those underrepresented voices and their strategies. If they're, supporting those, I think that's going to be particularly compelling from an impact perspective.
And when people meet Brian and Kiona, I think you'll get a really quite a nice look in terms of kind of how they've approached that and what their lived experiences are bringing to the table.
And I think that's a good point, right? Because the lived experience is completely different. Their networks are completely different. And that just means that they see different opportunities as well. It's not, because you just said it, right, Sandy? There is, of course, the impact angle of it, but there's also the fact that there's a bunch of opportunities that no one had really tapped into because it was invisible to a bunch of white dudes on Sand Hill Road, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The next one up is Chi Impact Capital. And it's been a lot of fun to meet Enrique in New York and in Geneva and his colleagues, Kristen and the whole team. We had a long debate in Geneva at a recent event that was bringing them together. And what sticks out for me, I mean, they're really trying to change the way people can think about investing. And we brought up this aspect of 2 and 20. And Enrique and Kristen have brought in an approach that completely links all of their carry to their impact metrics, which was a very controversial topic. And it'd be a lot of fun to get into with you, Sandy, and Andreas. But just one more word on them before we do that. They're investing in companies with a positive impact at the heart of their business models, as well as advocating for shifts towards a regenerative economy and a more conscious form of investing. They're really across a lot of climate portfolio companies, circular economy, some investing into nature as well. But yeah, Andreas, how often does 2 and 20 come up as something that is debated on the podcast?
Every single time, because it's always the LPs asking 2 to go down and the GPs asking 2 to go up. No, on the serious side, we have met one team that was looking at doing the same type of thing, connecting impact goals and actual economic goals for the team as well. I think that, my probably main perspective on that is, I would be wary of tying economic incentives to impact incentives if you want any LPs that are purebred economic investors, right, or financial investors, because they might then have a very clear flag that says this is going to be governed by different principles than finance first, right? And that's maybe my only perspective. It's an interesting thing to do. I think that hopefully we're also getting to a point where the international monetary system is also encouraging, in itself, people to do the right thing. But we're not there yet. So if you're ready to put on extra, constraints on yourself or forcing mechanisms, I think it's only good.
Yep. Well, listen, that could be maybe an interesting topic for one of the upcoming podcasts.
Absolutely.
And there was no consensus there at all.
Oh, definitely.
Sandy, is that something you look at in the IA50?
Yeah, in the IA50, in my own diligence, when I'm assessing a fund, I'm all for it. I think that impact-based incentive structures really allow the fund managers to walk the talk and talk the talk. I think we're always looking for ways to really prove out the authenticity around the impact approach, and tying their pay to those impact outcomes, just about the highest level of sincerity that you can see. So as a pure impact investor, I'm all for it. I hear your points though, Andreas, and I think they're totally valid. But I think if you're investing in an impact fund where the underlying portfolio company's business model and the impact are inextricably linked, then they should move together, the impact and the financial outcomes.
If you look at this from a policy angle, this is where some of the dispute came up, is that some regulations, some countries have some issues that make it hard for people to do that. So this is part of what we want to try to do. But listen, let me keep going, because the three of us only have about 14 minutes left, and we still have about 10 more of these funds to get through.
It's just going to be more fun now.
Exactly. Circulate Capital, led by Rob Kaplan, is investing in startups that reduce plastic waste and fight climate change, and is aiming to unlock $1 billion to prevent 150 million tons of plastic pollution from entering the environment. I'm pretty sure they were named as part of the IA50, Sandy, in the past. Yes. They've been deeply involved in our plastic work with the Global Plastic Action Partnership. You want to say a word about Rob and Circulate?
Sure, yeah, just that, yes, this is one of the ones that is also on the IA50 emerging managers list. I probably should have shared early on that the IA50 is actually 3 different lists, including an emerging manager, where the overlap with the innovation funds challenge really is. I really like this one because of their partnership with their corporate investors and the ability to really leverage those investors in their work reducing plastics in the supply chain.
It's been fun for us as well, because Circulate has already invested in a few of the entrepreneurs that have come through UpLink.
Oh, that's
and
great.
So it's been fun to see kind of some of that synergy already established. Click Ventures is another one. It's interesting that they're kind of doing a little bit of both. It's an Asian-based, Singapore-based fund, investing in early stage startups that are positively impacting the planet with solutions focused on the circular economy, education, and nature. And just now they've also started to invest in other funds, which is just a twist that we learned since they actually became a part of this. Yeah, it's been interesting to meet Jenny and Carmen and the team. They were with us both in New York and Geneva recently, and to see how kind of their lived experience out in Asia has taken a different approach kind of in supporting that ecosystem. Maybe I keep going, Andreas, Sandy, for a couple, and then if there's any amongst, let me do 3 or 4, and then you guys kind of bring up any from that.
Yeah, I have comments on only a couple more, so but I know well.
I would only say about Click that I love that they're doing a fund of funds model. We all need more fund of funds, so it's all good.
Contrarian Ventures is one that's been on the podcast before, I think, Andreas.
All I want to say is we love the team. They've built a huge community around them that was much, much bigger than the first fund, and now we're ready to go all out with their fund too, and they're going to be amazing. They're going to, I think they're really going to lead the charge in Europe in many ways. So that's great. I love the team.
Just for those that don't know them, they are investing in climate-focused technologies in Israel and Europe and partnering with early-stage companies that are leading the way towards net zero. The next one is Cross-Border Impact Ventures. This is one of the few ones that is actually looking at the healthcare system, and they are addressing the inequalities in the global investment ecosystem by prioritized solutions, improving access to high-quality healthcare for women, children, and adolescents. They've gotten some massive supporters behind them. They're on their way towards a $100 million fund. Groups like SIF, USAID, the Canadian Grand Challenge, but also a really nice collection on the LP side between institutional investors, governments, philanthropists, big foundations. They're prioritizing an issue that isn't typically talked about. I think, Sandy, they may be part of the impact asset ecosystem as well.
Yep, exactly. They're on the IA50 emerging manager list. And I think just one other thing about them, I think they were one of the few that had actual impact targets beyond just the type of impact they want to have and that they'll track. They actually put a stake in the ground and said, we want to save 500,000 lives with this fund, which is something we like to see too on the impact side.
They are really going hard right now. Annie has been back and forth across the pond, going to Gin. She came to another entrepreneur event here in Switzerland. So if you get the chance to check out the work of Annie and Donna, make sure you do so. Draper's Richard Kaplan Foundation is supporting early-stage, high-impact social enterprises with over half their portfolio focused on addressing the funding gap for SDG entrepreneurs. They are a little bit different. They are philanthropically driven from in terms of how they're gathering their capital, but then delivering that through an interesting mix of equity, grants, and loans. It's been great to get to know Stephanie, but also longtime colleagues who are part of the forum's YGL community, Margot and Kanini. Next up is ImpactVC, is the only one that we got from Latin America. There wasn't a ton, but we liked this one because it was investing in tech startups that were focusing on health, education, food, and a few of the other regional challenges that are really important for us to be identifying. Catapult Ocean is another one that has a bit of an accelerator model. They've also been kind of the longest standing collaborator with UpLink. They were with us at the very conception days of thinking about how could UpLink develop. They're focused on ocean and other issues that are touching ocean entrepreneurs, blue tech companies, and have a great little subset of entrepreneurs that are also on the UpLink platform. Link Capital invests in early stage companies with a special focus on the energy transition as well as on software, mobility, and technology. They're based up in Norway, a really nice operation that's getting off the ground there. I think they're into their second fund. It was what was submitted here, and it's been great to see how they've developed.
Yeah, we know Christian from the team. He's a super cool guy. He's doing great work also for emerging managers, other emerging managers outside of just the capacity of Link Capital. So I'm super happy to see them picked up for this as well.
One of the few ones that was focusing on the alternative protein space, food innovation, was Sentient Ventures. And they're on a mission to remove farmed animals from our food systems by investing in companies that develop superior alternatives to animal products. Either of you guys have any firms you've been working with, any funds that have been focusing on this alternative protein space?
Yeah, so I actually know two. World Fund is, of course, one. They're huge. And then a much smaller one, which is led by an emerging manager called Maximilian, or Max Bade, as most people know him in Europe. I love this space. I love... sorry to say it, I love steak. I love my beef. So I'm really happy to be now able to buy meat or false meat from places like Juicy Marbles, which is one of his portfolio companies. I'm super hyped about this space, and I think that it's great to see that we now have viable alternatives to having to go out and slaughter cattle to get our food. So I'm only happy to see this development.
Well, it's been great to see Alexandra and Manish getting this off the ground. What about you, Sandy?
Yeah, same. I'm a huge supporter of alternative meat as a vegetarian. I'm very excited about it. ImpactAssets was actually an early investor in Beyond Meat.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
You're happy about that one, I guess.
Yeah, that was a very exciting investment for us. Our client did very well.
I would challenge you to taste Juicy Marbles filet mignon and then send me a review if you think that's better. I'll tell the CEO to send you a trial package.
Please do.
You can send back a review whether it beats Beyond Meat.
Yes, please do. I have never had it. I'm excited to try it.
I'll ping him.
You can tell from Sentient Ventures we're into the S's, almost there, guys. Swen Blue Ocean is another one that we've known. We've got a big initiative at the forum that focuses on the ocean. Christian Telecki is the director over there. The Friends of Ocean Action is the initiative, and Swen Blue Ocean, Christian Lim is one of the folks we've worked with quite a lot. They are part of a bigger endeavor called Sven Capital. And they also have an interesting approach to the 2 and 20. They're putting 50% of their carry linked to the impact targets that they have. And they're focusing on regenerating the health of our ocean with solutions tied to things like overfishing, ocean pollution, and the impact of climate change. It was great to meet Jerome recently and to have Christian and his team involved over a longer period of time. One of the Swiss-based ones is called, well, I guess Swiss, Luxembourg, and Sweden, if I remember correctly, is Uniterra. They are supporting European ESG startups with solutions to climate change and biodiversity loss, targeting the removal of 2 gigatons of CO2 from the environment by 2030. Luca and Uniterra were present with us in New York and Geneva recently, and they are super ambitious, thinking about how they can really track and really focus on trackable targets like the CO2, like the plastic, and make sure that that's part of the metrics that their fund is focused on. Last but not least is Water Equity. Water Equity is kind of arm in arm with water.org, which is the fantastic organization of Gary White and Matt Damon. I'm sure you've heard of Gary White, but you might not know Matt Damon. He's a small actor who has a few interesting parts over the years, obviously trying to lend a hand to Gary White and his big efforts to really change the way investment is flowing to waterpreneurs, or as we've been calling them, aquapreneurs. So listen, I'd love for you to dive in, Sandy, Andreas, any other kind of comments that you have. Sandy, I think you guys have worked with Water Equity in the past.
Yeah.
But across the board, at this point, we've got a few minutes left. It'd be great to hear any kind of observations that you guys have around, maybe we start with Water Equity, Sandy, but then afterwards, Andreas and yourself can wrap up with a couple comments about what you think is so unique about this group.
Sure. So maybe just on Water Equity. So that one is also an IA51, as well as an investee of ImpactAssets. And I just would call out that this one's unique for the group because it's not actually a VC. And I can't remember exactly how the debate went among the selection committee. They basically work with financial institutions to provide debt financing to help the ultimate borrowers, purchase the infrastructure that they need to install safe water in their homes. I know we went back and forth a little bit on the selection committee about this one because of the structure. I love what they're doing, and I think it's incredibly important. And I guess the innovative nature here is that it's not VC.
I would rather not reply to this, and then because I want to give the floor to Sandy to be able to talk about the whole group and the initiative as such, because Sandy, to be honest, you've dedicated much more of your career and life to the space of impact. So I want to give you the floor rather than me, who, in all fairness, is only doing it once in a while.
Sure. I mean, I think overall the group is really representative of a lot of different things that are super innovative happening in the investment world. I loved that this specific process was very narrowly focused on a handful of SDGs. And so we were really finding very unique niche strategies, whether it was partnering with accelerators or tying your compensation to impact. I think that it's just a really great group. And was it intentional that we ended up with 17 funds and our 17 SDGs?
17 funds for the 17 SDGs. We'll claim credit whenever we can for things that make sense.
Yeah, and it was a lot of fun. You also, John, really managed a really interactive selection process, which we need to learn from for the IA50. The screen sharing and the music that you played, it was overall just a really fun experience.
Yeah, there's nothing that beats John's soundtracks. That is an experience worth for anyone to seek out if they can.
Well, listen, in the last minute or two, let me just do a couple of rounds of thank yous and a little bit of a preview. So thank you to Sandy for being a part of this and ImpactAsset for joining as one of the supporting partners and part of the selection committee. Andreas and David obviously have been involved, and one of the commitments that they made, each supporting partner made a commitment. And the one that they did is that we'd love to give some airtime to the funds as they come on board and get to know what we're up to. So the preview is you're going to hear a little bit more from some of these funds. We'll see when and how frequently, but it's going to be a lot of fun to give them to get behind the microphone and contribute to your audience, Andreas, to see how things are going. We're also looking to engage them in a whole bunch of different activities. You talked about this ecosystem contribution, Sandy, and we went to an amazing event that you guys hosted at the Federal Reserve in New York a few weeks back, about a month ago, which talks about the type of access we're providing to fund managers. There was a brilliant cross-section of government, business, other entrepreneurs and other VCs that were attending that event. We also got a bunch of these fund managers to attend the World Economic Forum's Sustainable Development Impact meetings. And just 2 weeks ago, we welcomed them to Geneva for what I thought was a really interesting, what was titled, It Takes Three to Tango, where we had 5 entrepreneurs, 6 of the funds, and 10 family offices for a full day of workshops, pitches. We had both the entrepreneurs pitch and the funds pitch. And it was a great way for us to also teach the family offices a bit about how they could consider investing in a different way with some of the capital from those organizations. So on our side at UpLink, we love the work that the European VC is up to. We love the work that ImpactAsset. We'd also like to give a quick shout out to Carbon Equity, Desolinator, the Impact Office, Isomer Capital, Salcante Ventures, Seaman Energy Ventures, Top Tier Impact, and Source and Impact Center for supporting this challenge. A whole great ecosystem of people that are supporting this work. and I maybe close and hand back the floor to Andreas to bring us home.
Well, I'll happily bring us home and just say, John, thank you once again for joining us on the podcast, because every single time I am amazed at your level of emceeing skill. It's I love it, and I want to do more stuff with you. And Sandy, thanks so much for joining us as well on the podcast. I think the big thanks, of course, should come from John, because John knows how much you're doing for the WEF and UpLink initiatives. So from my side, it's just thanks a million for taking these. I don't know what we ended up 45 minutes. So
hopefully we didn't get you into any trouble, Sandy.
I don't think so. I think we were in safe ground the whole time.
Can we read the statement again? I'd love to end us
on a really high note.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the European VC, the go-to podcast for everything European VC. If you love the show, share it with your friends and join our newsletter at eu.vc.